Thank you, Justin, for this and everything you did to get ready for what, no pressure, but what I expect to be a fantastic program. Forgive a quick Berkeley Judicial Institute advertisement before we get started. Justin will pop some links into the chat, but now that we have you here, whether it's your first time here or if you're one of our cherished regular attendees, we'd love to see you back. Check out our website where you can register for future programs, watch past recordings, read interesting things. Join our mailing list, follow us on social media. Advertisement over, on to our main event. We have 3 really spectacular faculty joining us today, and I hope these 3 forces for good will forgive short introductions. They'll be able to tell you a little bit more about themselves as we go along. Our moderator is Judge Laurel Beeler, who serves as a magistrate judge in the Northern District of California. Among her long list of good things that she does for the world, she's very strongly involved in their district's reentry programs. She'll speak to Cynthia Chase and Lara Love Hardin, who, among their long list of good things, co-founded the Gemma Project, which works to create gender-responsive jail and prison reentry programs. Ms. Chase is a licensed social worker with 25 years experience in the juvenile and criminal legal system as a social worker, probation officer, and corrections program director. Ms. Hardin is president of True Literary. Sorry, Justin and I are having trouble getting regular words out today. She's president of True Literary. She's a literary agent and best-selling author of books, including The Many Lives of Mama Love. This is not a paid promotion, but if you haven't had the opportunity to read the book, I would go right out and get it. It's a beautiful read. Justin will also put links to our accomplished speakers in the chat. So while I could go on about them, let's have them tell you about themselves. Judge Beeler, where will we start today?
So I thought, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to have a wonderful conversation with our co-faculty today. I thought it would be nice for them to begin by introducing themselves. One thing, the book is amazing. I was glad to have an opportunity to read it, especially since now restorative justice and trauma-informed treatment is a big focus of mine in best practices based in neuroscience, a big concern of mine. And I thought the book was moving and amazing and touches on a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today and more. And so I do encourage you to get it. It's amazing. Among your many qualities, Lara, is that you're an excellent writer and a wonderful storyteller. So they say good writers show, not tell, and you definitely do that. But I thought it would be nice for you to introduce yourselves, not necessarily, although it could be from a resume perspective, but what struck me about both of you and maybe all of us is that you have a vocation. And that looks different ways at different times for you. But I thought you could talk about that by way of introduction. And Lara, maybe we start with you.
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Denise, and everyone for being here. I never thought I'd be co-faculty in this specific audience, so this is very nice to be here. So what is my resume beyond my resume? So I love words and stories and books, and I'll do it in numbers. I have 4 boys. I'm the mother of 4 boys. That is the most important thing. My youngest just finished his first year of college. And I'm saying that for Judge Guy, who's listening. And I have 6 New York Times bestsellers. And I pled guilty to 32 felonies and am a justice impacted woman. And all of those things are part of who I am and part of my story. And I'm a literary agent who has had the privilege of working with some of the most amazing people in the world: Nelson Mandela, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the Dalai Lama, Brian Stevenson. And I am very grateful for every day that I spend in doing my vocation, what I love. And my lane is books, and my lane now is also advocacy.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. Cynthia, maybe introduce yourself and what matters to you. And perhaps as part of that, you can talk a little bit about the Gemma Project.
Yeah, happy to. Also terrible to follow a storyteller introducing myself, but also fantastic with this particular storyteller. So I will say, there's some people who live to work and some people who work to live. I'm a live to work kind of person. Everything that I do is meaningful to me and provides me with joy and purpose. And I'm actually, it's a real background. Someone's like, oh, your background's beautiful. It's actually, I am on vacation right now. But I'm here today with you because I care about this. I care about equity. I care about justice. I care about systems improving and improving the lives of those who are impacted by them. So not just the justice system, but health and welfare and child welfare and housing and all of the other intersections that happen for particularly justice involved people. So part of my my whole life really is working on justice system improvement and reform, and particularly at the intersection of justice and gender. And I'm just thrilled to be part of the conversation today.
And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you do that, about the Gemma Project and how that advances those interests.
Yes. So I'm very, very pleased to say that I am co-founder with Lara of the Gemma Project, which is a reimagining of the original Gemma program, which started in Santa Cruz County. There's some really fantastic things about Gemma. One of the most important things is that it was started by and for women who were incarcerated. And their whole purpose was to create a program that was built for them instead of what had been offered to them for years, which is programs that were built for men and offered to women. And there's a lot of reasons why that happens, some of which are 90% of the population is identified as male, but women are the largest growing incarcerated population in the country. And it's been growing at a phenomenal rate, 750% over the last 3 decades. And yet we still don't serve women, even though we know exactly how to serve them well and how to improve their lives, the lives of their children, and reduce recidivism and improve communities. So the Gemma Project does just that. It's a gender responsive, trauma responsive program offered to justice involved women in jails and prisons. And it incorporates the voice of those who have been through the system. Our staff also includes majority justice impacted people, as well as our founding member. So we're just excited that we're here to have the conversation and talk about how we can replicate the Gemma Project across the country so that more women can tell a story like Lara's, where they don't come out and go right back in, where they get to stay with their children, where they get to keep their jobs and keep their homes, and where they get to have a platform to really contribute their creativity, their innovation, their skill, their commitment to social justice and helping others, which is largely what women who are coming out of jail say they want to do. They want to help others. And we're excited that there's a bunch of different states represented today. I think 7 or 8 of them. And so we're hoping that we can be in those communities across the country and not just in California, although we've got a lot of work to do here.
Yeah, well, lots of work to be done everywhere. So one of the things that I think about is, we all work in a certain realm and we speak the same language, at least those of us who try to be evidence-based and keep up with all of the best practices. But I think it can be hard for people to see the movie version of what you're describing. So you're talking about how we have programs that are designed for men. And this is, of course, true in so many different areas, including, for example, medicine, but where research or programs designed for men is laid on top of women's programs. So maybe you could, and one of the things I was struck by, Lara, in your book, I could really see the church. I saw the volunteers. I saw there was yoga. I saw there was a kitchen. I saw you cooking in the kitchen with your son. So that was the movie version of what you're describing. But maybe either one of you could sort of show us, what does this program look like in practice for the participants who are experiencing it? A brief video of a moment in the life of a Gemma program.
Yeah, I think I'll describe the logistics part of it, and I think it'd be great for Lara to explain like what that felt like to move
Yeah, I
through
was
it.
gonna say, I could say what it feels like. Could you?
Yeah. So what's really important about the design of the Gemma Project is it starts in custody. So there's a lot of reentry programs that begin once folks are out. But what is clear in the research and clear when you talk to folks who are incarcerated, they need to start planning for reentry pretty much when they're, detained. And that those plans and getting all the things in place structurally, logistically, those relationships, the referrals, the wait lists that exist for most of the programs that judges and probation officers want them to go to, you got to get on those right away if you're hoping to be able to be released into a more structured setting, right? So the Gemma Project starts inside, and we have a curriculum that is provided multiple days a week that is a combination of both the therapeutic aspect of things, which is very gender responsive, and the logistics thing. So it's a combination of you need to get a job, you need to get housing, you got to go to treatment, you might have a case plan with child welfare that you've got to do some things for. A lot of the folks we work with, they can check boxes, they can do those things, but what they're also dealing with is the humongous amount of trauma that is specifically present for justice-involved women. And so all the triggers that happen, all the coping skills they need to develop, all the ways that, frustrations that we all experience, for instance, going to the DMV, who's had a positive experience there? Not a lot of humans. Right. But then you have to deal with catching the bus, having the right paperwork, every little setback for all the things that folks have to do is compounded by all the other things that are happening in their lives, which usually include histories of trauma, as I said, lots of impacts of poverty, mental health, substance use, dealing with oftentimes challenging, if not abusive relationships that may or may not currently exist, all parenting and all of the things related to that, transportation that's not consistent. So we combine those two things with our in-custody program, and then we follow individuals for up to 18 months post-release, because that's the other challenge. You get out, you have a great plan on paper, we've helped you sort of role play through that, but then life happens, right? And so who's there to help support you when those challenges occur? And that's our team. We work together, and we work to really build a network of support around folks so that they're not on their own, that they have really a team of people beyond us with other subject matter experts and other folks who have, gone through it to really help them stay on track. And those things have been shown to be incredibly successful when you look at the research, but also when you hear directly from women. And I'll turn it over to Lara.
And just one thing, how do you define success? You said that things have been shown to be successful. What does success look like?
So most of the research in this space and success has been defined as recidivism, right? So that's pretty common standard outcome that we look at and the research has relied on, but also the research has shown, and there's a great report that I'm happy to share with folks, that we need to look beyond recidivism, because it's one measure. It's not also a very easy thing to measure, and a lot of people have different perspectives on how you measure it. But we're also looking at quality of life improvements. So are people, getting or sustaining jobs? Are they safely housed? Are they relying on benefits less? Are they, do they have a health home? Are they taking their medication, right? Are the other impacts to them as humans and also to our systems being reduced? And we're just seeing healthier communities because of this. So we look at all those things. Recidivism is going to continue to be one of the things that in the criminal justice setting, we're always going to look at. What we found is when you help people be healthier, you also see reductions in recidivism. So they go hand in hand.
So in our program, we call them the pillars of wellness, right? Mm-hmm. So that's so that's a wonderful description of success. I think I, for one, would love to see that study.
Happy to share it.
That would be great. Lara, tell us from obviously you had an important enough experience, and you can describe that experience, and it was important enough that you co-founded the project. So tell us a little bit about those things.
So I think I would describe the original Gemma program that I did, and this is in 2009. So we're 15 years ago. What it felt like to me at that time in my life was community. It felt like an anchor. it felt like hope and possibility. And for me, just the, I mean, it sounds simple and minor, but the fact that there were volunteers who were sharing their time and were seeing, it felt like, you know, it was a place for me where I could go that I felt valued. And I felt, it felt like taking a big exhale in the system, in custody. And some of it was basic life skills. When you know, my experience, I went into my incarceration as not only a college graduate, but I had a master's degree. And I loved school. So I was like, give me homework. Like, I loved that part of it. But to me, it felt like focus and structure and an anchor and possibility, but mostly it felt like community at a time when I felt completely isolated. And there was so much, you know, I didn't feel that isolated again until I got out, and that lack of community. And it really took, you know, over a decade for me to realize like how healing that is. And, you know, when I was released from custody, I was, you know, basically jobless, homeless, carless, friendless, without my children, whole lot of shame, rebuilding my life, no idea how it was my first time incarcerated, so I had no idea how high the barriers were. You know, I thought I was just going to be like, I'm following the rules and I'd be done and everything would be fine. And I think the most surprising thing for me that, you know, went on for over a decade was just how easy it would be for me to go back for never committing a crime again or taking an opiate. And what was the most surprising was there were times, you know, I know I'm talking about reentry now, when I felt like I would be safer in this horrible place that I also swore I would never go back to, and I have not. So I think part of you know, I used to wander over to the Gemma Project offices on my release because I didn't know where else to go. I didn't have a car, so I'd walk there, but I knew that there was a place and people in a judgment-free zone and a place that felt safe. And that meant everything. It meant more than I knew it would ever mean, you know, given my former life. So that's what it felt like. And so that's part of the reason of co-founding the Gemma Project was, one, the illogical barriers that I think are not intentionally put there. I think it's just a result of some bureaucracy and lack of communication in county governments, but so frustrating and impossible. And it's really hard to do without support. And so I wanted to help other women both navigate that. I wanted to give people community and support. And also, I think, you know, for me, the shame and the hiding my story for over a decade, well over a decade, and the stigma around being a justice impacted woman, I really wanted to make sure no one went through that for as long as I did.
And what, how did you emerge? Well, so you talk about the Gemma Project, creating a place for community when you had no community. And so that's a first thing. And then it's part of a process of re-engaging. So you build a community, and it's clear from your book, you emerged into community through the work, through your literary work and otherwise. You also describe a process, both here and in your book, but to emerge from trauma, lack of community, to a place where you have community, and to emerge from shame, that's a big process. And and I know part of that is why you wrote your book, to provide some of the insight into that process, but I don't know if you can, you know, describe that a little bit more. What is the process for emerging, almost like a butterfly from a cocoon of shame? How did that happen? I mean, it started with Gemma, but do you have some insights there? And maybe there's a passage in your book that might capture it, because it is what you're writing about.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it was a very long process for me, but I tend to, you know, do things the hard way. So hopefully for other people, it wouldn't be so long. I think there's a passage I could read about my Gemma graduation.
Okay, that would be great.
I could read that, and if it gets boring, just wave your hands, everybody. This is after completing the program of Gemma. It's in a chapter called Mother's Day. A few weeks later, we have a Gemma graduation at a hotel near the courthouse. We are given graduation gowns. We are each expected to give a speech. Friends and family, judges and attorneys and city officials, and even some guards attend the ceremony. I invite my sons, but only Dylan and Cody can make it. For many of the girls, this will be the only graduation they'll ever have. I have graduated high school and college and graduate school, but I feel most proud of this commencement. It feels like a celebration. When we come out to begin the ceremony, we all dance out one by one to Superwoman by Alicia Keys. It should have been embarrassing for all of us in our maroon caps and gowns, swaying and dancing and celebrating because we graduated from a basic life skills program. The audience of judges and guards is slightly uncomfortable, and my boys are mortified. But our dancing is an act of rebellion. Who are we to celebrate? Who are we to laugh and smile? Who are we to wear our caps and gowns proudly and share our speeches with confidence? Who are we to identify as superwomen? We are women full of possibility and hope. In my speech, I talk about the experience of time in jail. I talk about how I used to treat time as a limitless resource and not the precious and rare commodity it actually is. I try to convey how often the past is present when you have only your own mind for company and how the future is unknown. I talk about pain pushing and vision pulling. I talk about missing Dylan's high school graduation the week earlier, but how he is here to see me graduate. And I ask the audience to cheer for him. And then I promise my boys, the guards, the judge on my case who is watching, that I will never miss another graduation of any of my children, which I did not. My old boyfriend, the district attorney, is at the graduation. Cassandra is flabbergasted because he has never attended one of these ceremonies before. I see him watching me dance, staring at me intently while I give my speech. He gets up to leave when the reception is about to begin, and I track his movements to the door. He turns around the doorway and our eyes meet. He smiles, I smile. In this small moment, we are friends again. We are on the same side. It's a long summer without Gemma to break up the monotony, but I work in the garden. Let me just see. I think that's enough for the graduation speech.
Great. Well, that's a lovely excerpt that
Yeah,
illustrates some of the feeling. It shows the feelings that attach to it. I wanted to remind everybody in the audience, we have a chat, so we're very interested in any questions you might have. It's an opportunity. It's a remarkable opportunity, the ability to get together and converse. And it's, even though it's in an odd way, Zoom actually allows that even better than even though I love the in-person, everybody knows I'm so over Zoom. But it does give us an opportunity to converse in a way that's easy because we've got the chat box. So that was a lot. I just, sorry, it kind of threw me a little bit for a loop. I've read it before, but hearing it read, puts a different feeling on it. One thing that occurs to me, so here I am, we're a lot of us here on the Zoom are in the criminal justice system. You have judges, you have probation officers, you have perhaps pretrial services officers, prosecutors, defense lawyers, people who work for the courts. And so we have projects, we live in a resource-rich community in the Bay Area. We have some very bad treatment programs and we have some very good programs. And we have programs that are run by medical professionals or social workers who are informed by good treatment practices when it's done at its best, like the Gemma Project. But one of the things I like to think you spoke of a lack of community, and you heard me say this when we talked, we are all part of the community. I've told you that I said this in my own courts. It's not us and them. It's just us. No matter where you are, no matter what point in the process you are, including during the court proceedings, we are all part of the community. And so what we've talked about so far is Gemma, and we'll come back to that and some of the things that it can do and what good support can do for people. But what are your thoughts about the court system, the supervision system, the jail system? I mean, one of the things I say is we don't give anybody in custody the opportunity to do better, or we don't give them a lot of opportunity, especially in jails. But throughout that process, including pretrial detention, we have more programs in prisons, but also through the court proceedings themselves and supervision in particular. For this audience might be very interested in hearing what you think are the things that are important. So I'll give you one small example, but there may be many others that you consider. In the one of the things they tell us for reentry court, those that read up on the best practices, is sit at the same table, not up at the podium, or not up on the big chair, the dais, and if possible, even sit a little lower than other people. So I'm just saying this as part of this idea, I think of as a roundtable. That's just a small illustration of the larger point of community. But at all of these different places in the process, what would your suggestions be for improvement in how we engage with each other?
I mean, the process is bewildering. And I think for me, I was really at the lowest point in my life. I'm in a bewildering system. I did choose and make a conscious choice just for my own mental well-being to believe that everyone was on my side, even the prosecutor, right? That helped me get through it. It was an Eckhart Tolle trick I learned that I read in jail. But I think for me, I didn't realize till much later recently how hard it is to advocate for yourself when you're in so much shame and guilt and sort of at the mercy of a system that is terrifying for anybody. And so I think I didn't, I don't want to go through this again, but I know a lot more things now that I knew then. And it really is only now that I'm realizing all the places that I didn't advocate for myself because I didn't know I could, or I didn't feel like I could. And, I believe everyone on this Zoom, I mean, you wouldn't be doing this jobs if you didn't care deeply. And I think my frustration, and I said this in so many questions I've gotten on book tour over the last 11 months, that nothing that I went through, sort of the barriers that seemed illogical, were intentional. Like, I don't think they were intentional. I think it was sort of just the frustration and messiness of bureaucracy. And to me, it was so hard to have organizations in the same county, like divisions of the same county, who weren't communicating. I think that was really the thing that was the most frustrating and impactful long term, and still impacting me now 15 years later. I think the one thing that I didn't know, and I don't know that everyone knows who's not like actively working in the jails, in the correctional facilities, and certainly maybe not the judges, but just how dehumanizing and how what it feels like to lose any sense of dignity when you're in custody, and to be in that it's not just being a number, but there was nothing in custody that felt supportive in that system other than Gemma. But in the main jail, there was nothing that did not feel designed to keep you at your lowest. And I think that is a really hard thing to navigate when you're like already at your lowest and feeling shame. Every woman I met in jail, no one wanted to be there. Just like, no one, I didn't grow up saying, I hope I get felonies someday, or I hope I become addicted to opiates, prescription opiates, or I hope I do, hurt people. Like, no one has that. And everyone in there, especially because 80% of women in jail are mothers, everyone was desperate to do better. And every day that discussion in G Block or whatever yard about the desperation to do better and reunite with children and get out of relationships and go back to school, all of that was there. And all of that at the same time was hammered at by the custodial system. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So Cynthia, maybe I'd love to hear your reaction to that, about the essentially dehumanizing aspect of the jails and keeping it at your lowest. And maybe as part of that, is there a model for doing something different? And how do you change hearts and minds? Because some people may not care or may not understand or know.
Yeah. I have so many things I'm trying to organize them, but I use statistics a lot because I think it's important, because we're talking about the system as a whole, but in specific, we want to advocate for people recognizing, acknowledging that justice-involved women are different. It's a different population. And when we say women, I'll just note, we include trans women in that. Every state and has different policies around how they house folks who are of different genders. But I will say that that's included when I say women. You know, the fact is that women are 10 to 13% of the population. They are growing, but they have very different pathways into the system and out of the system. And we know what they are. And the system is traumatizing for everyone who goes through it. And I will say also for those who work in it, as somebody who worked in corrections with officers, it's an inhumane, awful environment for everyone, including staff. However, they actually can come and go at the end of the day, and folks who are incarcerated cannot. And the things that happen through the process, women are detained longer pre and post adjudication. And like Lara said, and so I can get you the statistics on that as well. So why are they staying longer? I mean, we can look at that. There's a lot of reasons, but the impacts are not just to them, right? She mentioned that 80% of women who are incarcerated are mothers to, on average, 2.5 children. So each time she's inside for longer than their male counterparts, where are those children? And what are the collateral impacts that are happening because of that removal of the children, even if it's temporary, even if they're reunified, right? So we talk about adverse childhood experiences. One of them is, do you have an incarcerated parent? Think of all the millions of children in the United States that are answering yes to that, right? So there's things that happen that are different for women. And also, those who are on the bench here, I would love for you to think about how many times you've either asked or thought to yourself, when a female defendant is in front of you, where are your children? Who's taking care of them? I can guarantee you, if you think about the number of male defendants, it's going to be significantly lower who you ask that question to, who you've thought about that, right? So there's this extra pressure and also shame and responsibility that women both give themselves and is given to them by the system, that also simultaneously makes it harder for them to show back up and be the parent that they want to be. So there's just these compounding impacts that happen that I think we can think about as a system differently. And I appreciate, Judge, that you mentioned pretrial. We have some pretrial folks here. I know we for sure have somebody from a probation officer from Contra Costa County who we're starting a pretrial program with any minute now. Let's think about why women are inside longer pre and post adjudication for almost entirely nonviolent offenses. Could we keep those women in home with their children, in their jobs, going to treatment programs, accessing the services they need, and not having to enter a system that is re-victimizing and re-triggering? So
let's just, on that particular point on pretrial release and with conditions of treatment. So somebody I know who works in the system said something like, we pay an awful lot of money for bad treatment. And so one of the things, and we all in San Francisco, I think we know that we have some very, 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 some wonderful facilities, amazing, unbelievable, inspiring. And we have some that are part of the release industrial complex that are perhaps not so good. So what are the sorts of things that people could be thinking about for release conditions? And of course, on the state side, at least, there's social workers that are involved more frequently when people are released. What are some, and you also mentioned one other relevant thing, we know what works for women. Yeah. And so why don't you talk about what release conditions might look like? And then we might even segue after that into what sorts of programming would look like if you are in custody. So, what works? Yeah. So all the reentry needs women have are the same needs they have coming in. They need housing, they need employment or income that is consistent. They oftentimes need childcare. So it's all the things that we know are related to instability and desperate decision making, right? Is basically supporting themselves and their children a lot of times. We know treatment is often involved, so there's a lot of self-medication of histories of trauma that usually go back to childhood for female population. Also high for the male population, but off the charts for the justice-involved female population. So those are all things that I think once you put somebody inside, they're losing their housing, they're losing their jobs, right? So we actually make it worse by incarcerating. If we can think about pretrial release as
keeping them in their homes, keeping them in their jobs, having them go to treatment, and having treatment providers that provide evening or flexible weekend treatment options so that they're not having to make these decisions. And Lara talks a lot about it in the book, where you've got, 3 different folks who are requiring her to do things, but they don't count, right? Probation maybe doesn't count what child welfare is counting, or you have to provide drug tests for all of them, even though it's the same urine, right? Like, why not share the results, right? So like, how can we think about making it so that the hoops that folks are jumping through, some of which are incredibly important and meaningful, are not just hoops? Like, let's think about, how do we do the things that we know people are saying they need and women are saying they need? They need the treatment support, they need the jobs and the access to incomes that are livable. They need housing. They need that network of support, because it's a pretty isolating experience for a lot of women who are in that shame before they're incarcerated, and then it just exacerbates once they're there. So those are the things that you see over and over.
Let me ask this question about that. So what we see sometimes, we see incredible trauma, not just childhood trauma, but other trauma. We see abusive relationships as children and through adulthood. We see trauma and addiction, whether it's dual diagnosis or the need to sedate, to quite literally not experience life, to remove yourself from it. And then we see criminal behavior that attaches to the need to feed the addiction. As Lara said, I say the same thing. People don't say, I would like to grow up someday to be a drug dealer or steal credit cards from people's mail to fuel my drug habit. People don't say, that's a yay moment for me. And we see that cycle. So one of the things we care about, why everyone should care about it, some people care about it because of because of the trying to help people and that other part of it to achieve a good life, and part of it's about recidivism. But what kinds of, and we also know, I learned this last year when I went to the Harvard neuroscience program, it takes about 8 years for people to seriously engage with addiction sometimes. And then it can be at 5 years, generally, I think the neuroscience supports you're okay. And so the VA would say, because the VA has a very trauma-informed population, they talk about warm turkey, not cold turkey. And other neuroscience-informed approaches talk about the need, to address, if you address the housing, you can't address the addiction until you address the hierarchy of needs. You have to have someone housed before they can begin to deal with their addiction. But then you have someone who, winds up in the criminal justice system, and it is a process, not a destination necessarily. What sorts of recommendations do you have for people who are doing the supervision, have some of the metrics met, and not all of them, such as continued drug use? So what's your view as a provider about what that looks like? Because it can be hard to demand instant sobriety of people who are on supervision.
Oh yeah, I mean, so instant sobriety is unrealistic if you look at what addiction looks like as the medical model, right? Harm reduction, which is what you just mentioned, which is still a dirty word in a lot of places, but it's a.
And why is it a dirty word?
It's because it allows for the understanding of how addiction works, and actually how any medical illness works, is that people don't just stop eating or bad things and then cure their type 2 diabetes, even though that would do it, right? That and a little bit of movement. So it's the same thing for addiction. So it means that that people are not going to have this linear path where they just stop using and then they never use again, right? They're going to have ups and downs. They're going to not be sure if they want to change, even though they've had significant consequences for that behavior. So harm reduction models are absolutely supported by the science and have been for decades, and using that. And I know we have at least one drug court judge who's here who can talk maybe about that. Looking at things that are trauma responsive, not just trauma informed. So it means like moving from, we know trauma impacts how people behave, to we know it impacts how they behave, and therefore we're going to set up our programs to be responsive to that. They have to be gender responsive if they're offered to women, because a one size fits all doesn't, for anybody who's ever purchased a one size fits all thing, it doesn't fit, right? We need the thing that actually fits us. So that's huge. Motivational interviewing, which has been around a long time. A lot of people have been trained in it, but don't use it or don't use it effectively. It's remarkably impactful. Those are things that, you know, are important and critical, I think, to a foundation and fairly easily accessible. They're not rocket science. They're not super expensive to do. And they have incredibly important outcomes for the things we care about. Healthy humans, reductions in recidivism, and reductions in the amount of money we're spending on this issue, which is also an important factor that people think about.
So Lara, you know, there may be a part of your book that speaks to this. I wonder if you have thoughts of other, because you illustrate these concepts so well in your book. I wonder if there are other parts of another passage of your book you might want to read to us.
I just, one thing I just want to say, you know, this idea that, you know, addiction recovery is a process and there are going to be slips. I think in the system that it doesn't feel that way. And because you are so, certainly in reentry, there, you know, the hammer will drop if you miss anything, you know, and you're going to go back to jail and you're in this, survival mode or trying to, you know, rebuild your life. And I never felt that I felt like that was never an option. If I had, you know, luckily I did not relapse since my release. I have over 15 years clean, but it would have been helpful if I had. I would not have told anyone, right? I would have not gotten the help or gotten support around it because I would have been so afraid of losing my, like, so you know, the two things don't always go together.
No, it's such a great observation. I'll tell you this piece. We'll come to the book, because one thing, and what this is I have a male population illustration of this, and we think a lot, or I think a lot, about building motivation. But one of the things we say is, if you show up, try, and tell the truth, we can work with you on almost anything. I mean, violent crime, not a good thing, but all of the other, you know, process steps. So it's a very interesting, but you're right. Cynthia is also right. It's a tough one, and I should have for this. The system has a tough time engaging with that, and the not so secret agenda of having programs like this, and this to the point of Lara asking you to read or from your book or speak on these things, is when you show that it's a process, perhaps people reconsider how they approach problem solving. Because if we're always doing the same tired interventions when people have missteps, then we're not actually arriving at any solutions. And I guess Cynthia's point was, and it's not very realistic. It's not very helpful for the quality of life improvements that we hope to achieve from a focus that includes wellness. And it doesn't help community safety because it doesn't address the issues of recidivism. So that's it. So and your book, as again, which is lyrical, Lara, you're a great storyteller, and it's I couldn't put it down. You know, I think Denise had said that it's a one sitting type of book. I think I had to because of my job read it too. But it sounds like you've settled on another portion of the book to read to us.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's just, I'm so fascinated by that conversation that we just had, because I think when the stakes are so high, you know, like I was fighting to get my son back against a clock. So, and fighting to, you know, get off probation. So I think maybe I'll read a little bit about, you know, my journey. We're 7 years out, probably at least, and I'm still on probation. My male co-defendant with the same charges is off, and I am not, and I am responsible for the restitution solely. And yeah, so I think I'll read that. And meanwhile, I am keeping my past a secret in my career. I am, you know, again, I was ghostwriting for Archbishop Desmond Tutu and getting, you know, #1 New York Times bestsellers as a ghostwriter. And those two trains of like me trying to build my resume of goodness before the truth comes out, you know, we're like heading to a crossroads. And so this is a story when I'm with Elizabeth, my defense attorney, and going in 7 years on to try and get off probation. So it says, this is from a chapter 20, Many Lives. Each literary accolade is like money in the bank to me, a savings account I use as leverage against other parts of my life that are not as successful. I am still on probation, even though it should have ended 2 years ago. To get me off probation, Elizabeth and I go back to court. She argues with probation, saying that I've gone above and beyond during my incarceration and on probation, and I should be let off and allowed to pay my restitution as I can over time without the threat of going back to jail hanging over my head. She tells the judge that designing your life is #1 on the New York Times list. I think she is trying to show I have a valid job and also prove I'm a valuable member of society now and will not walk away from my debt. The judge does not seem impressed. I hate sitting on the bench outside the courtroom waiting for the judge's ruling. I feel automatically guilty. I can taste jail in my mouth, rusted metal and locked doors, and the bitterness of isolation. Before I was locked up, freedom used to feel like a vague, blurry concept and a given privilege, about as easy to pin down as wind. Now I understand freedom in the way you can only understand something when it's gone. Even out of jail, as long as I'm on probation, I'm still not free. The judge gives me the choice to either stay on probation until restitution is completely paid or make my restitution payments to a county collection agency and get off probation. The judge wants to make sure I understand that the latter option will ruin my credit. Elizabeth starts to argue, but the judge stops her. She looks at me and shrugs. There's just no way they're going to let me off probation without some penalty hanging over me. The choice is roughly equivalent to declaring bankruptcy, and it will keep my credit rating abysmally low for 7 years. Choosing between two bad choices is never easy, but I choose door number 2. Bad credit seems better than living while holding your breath. Probation has turned my 1-year sentence into a 7-year sentence, and now I have to add another 7 years of bad credit. But I take this trade-off in order to sleep in peace. The irony is that probation was originally invented as an alternative to incarceration. In the mid-1800s, a man in Boston convinced a judge to let him keep another drunken man in his care so he could rehabilitate him before sentencing. When the state of New York introduced probation in the early 1900s, one of the magistrate's arguments for creating a probation system was that it could be punishment without disgrace and effective without producing embitterment, resentment, or demoralization. Disgrace, embitterment, resentment, and demoralization is just another Monday in the modern world of probation. And if it was hard for me to navigate all the conflicting requirements and a logical bureaucracy as a white, educated woman with some social support, how difficult was it for others without the same sort of opportunities and privilege? Late at night, I sometimes read through the jail arrest logs. So yeah, so that was me just checking on the other women. So that, I think, is that part of when I finally got off probation. And, you know, as I think I said earlier, you know, I'm 15 years out. I've done as much more good in the world that I thought I would ever do as a child. And there's still ways in which it's affecting me, my criminal record. And, you know, I'm currently selling my house, and I'm so grateful I have a house to sell. And I'm currently terrified about entering the rental market temporarily because of my criminal record in Santa Cruz County. Terrifying, triggering. And it just shouldn't be the case.
So thank you for sharing that passage and that context for it. It's, I don't know, Cynthia, just coming at it from the programmatic perspective of somebody, and I guess it's you too, Lara, because you're co-founder. What do you do to create those apprehensions? I mean, because this is a big part of your book too, Lara, the apprehension that people experience when, is there, do you have ideas about how we reframe that beyond trying to have these kinds of conversations?
I'm sorry, I can you repeat the question?
Oh, I was just saying, you know, that we have this idea that you have a criminal background, you emerge from the criminal justice system, it's carried with you. And Lara just describing, continuing to be terrified by the fact that she's moving into the rental market. And because of the apprehension that people bring to who she is. And how do you, you know, do you have any idea systemically, are there things that we can do to address that? Is there some way we could do things differently? Maybe there's not. I mean, you know, one thing we do is we have these conversations to show, not tell, or we write books that get widely distributed. So I just didn't know if you had any thoughts based on Lara's recounting of that.
Yeah, definitely. And Lara will probably be able to add to this too. And I think, an occupational hazard for everybody on this call is your job is to see people at their worst, right? And you may not see them when they're doing their best. I mean, it's one of those challenges with prevention, right? If we're preventing something, we never see it happen, right? And that's a good thing. But what you see is when people are at their worst, unless they come back, for dismissal or things like that. Sometimes they don't even have to come back in front of the bench, or, a probation officer isn't actually physically meeting with them. It might just be phone calls at that point because things are going so well. So either way, you're inundated with the worst things. And it's hard not to be impacted by that as a human in this system, and to forget that there are these successes, and that, people can, relapse, people can recidivate and still have all these amazing things that are happening in their lives. And that just gets eclipsed. Right. So I think what we have to do is continue to humanize the issue, and allow for certainly folks outside our system to get exposed. And I think that's one of the things that's so amazing is Lara's getting to tell her story in spaces where, in book clubs and things all over the country. And think about what you think, who comprises a book club. It's not usually folks who are here, although y'all might be in book clubs too, but it's also just your average human, right? Like who's just part of their suburban book club, who's literally never thought about going to jail, or what happens when you're in jail, or what it's like when you come out. And so we're starting to have this conversation, which was a key part of what we wanted to do: educate, inform, and get folks to care about, to first realize they exist, but then to care about the many women who are going through the jail and prison system in our country, and what impacts that has to her as an individual, but what impacts that has to her family and to the community when we remove some of the most, and Lara has great stories in the book too, about ingenious sort of like transferable skills and creativity and survival and resiliency that exists in this population. Like, we need more people to see that, remember that, and see and experience the human behind the worst actions they might have ever had in their lives.
Well, I think Lara described this a little bit, but she does a better nomenclature to put on it. But basically, almost looking at everyone in the room with benevolence. So sort of, the Martin Luther King said, I love you, I would rather die than hate you, and to try to remember to be kind, but also to be. It's almost like just creating a different way of looking at people. I mentioned this too. Oprah and the book that she wrote with. Called with Bruce Perry, called "What Happened to You," and it's really a brain biology book. But the idea of you reframe your way of looking at people to not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, because that goes back to your trauma, the trauma that attaches to the lives that we encounter in the criminal justice system, and even that act of reframing provides for a more creative process. And I'll just add this too for the people, you mentioned this with the jails. It is tough on the correctional officers. It's tough on the entire staff. It is an inhumane environment for everybody. And it's a problem. In Alameda County, I know that the difficulties they've had hiring folks to provide services, the reluctance of people in county behavioral health to do things within the prison context. And so it's tough on everybody. And it seems, so it often can be easier. I have pop theories about a lot of things. It can often be easier not to care, or not to look, or to leave it behind, because it's too painful. And people, they adapt with defense mechanisms to reduce the experience. Although oddly, I think if you actually do look at things, if you look at people and you reframe it, back to my comment about we're all in a community, it's actually less painful to actually look at it than it is to put up barriers and render people other by not paying attention. It's actually, like many things in life, it's easier to drop the barriers and engage. So tough. So again, we're almost at an hour, and I think we have about 75 minutes, I think is what we have. And I want to make sure that people, it is an opportunity for any of you who are in the system, who want to comment on it. If there's, I know you said you had at least one reentry judge in the audience. I don't know if someone has a comment that they want to put in the comment box, or a question that they might want to ask, because I love these opportunities that we have to get together, share different experiences that we have, different seats in the house, and try to figure out a way to do our jobs better. And in the meantime, while that's happening, I'll say, Lara, you talked before about when you said that every project, every positive accolade and all the things you did was like money in the bank and it made you feel better. But one of the things about life that it seems that you were there by the, and of course your experiences, Oprah, the Dalai Lama, all of those incredible, but you also described those experiences as being enormously happy. You were one with the work. It wasn't there that at that point, it's not about recognition, it's about experience, because one of the things about hopefully we all grow up and we don't need to be A students anymore, right? So having recognition is one way of feeling better, but having that experience of a life, that's a transition. So by the end of your book, that's where you are in the experiences you described. And I don't know if you have any other observations about, beyond years of work to get there, what was what was the magic moment when some of those burdens of shame fell away from you? Was there a particular thing that happened where you thought it doesn't have to be like this?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a moment, there's a specific moment that I wrote about in the book. I will say that, all of the experiences, I was keeping my past a secret and working with these people, I was absorbing, I worked with neuroscientists, and I work with the, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and, even working with, and Brian Stevens, all these non-judgy people. I was still so desperately afraid because I had so much judgment of myself. And, when I was working on, I ghost wrote the Book of Forgiving with Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and I went back to the Gemma program in the Santa Cruz County Jail, and I worked with in the Gemma program and did some of the exercises in the book. And everybody in that program, struggled with self-forgiveness. That was the hardest lesson there. And, just to go back to what you were saying earlier, when I was working with Archbishop Tutu, he, before his passing, he was very adamant that he would never, no matter what, like his country, he fought apartheid. He had experienced some incredible, horrific violence and injustice that he fought against. He said he would never, no matter what, call anyone a monster, because when you did that, just when you dehumanize someone in any way, you take away their possibility for transformation when you dehumanize anyone. And I think that that's really the piece you're talking about when we dehumanize, when we take away dignity. There's, the reframe is everybody has the possibility of transformation. There was
redemption, right? If you don't believe in redemption, what's the point?
Yeah,
transformation. And that's a very Catholic thing, too.
Yeah. It's a very universal thing. And
yes,
I think
it is. It is.
I think if you look at the population, I mean, we're in our program, we're talking about women, but I see just, my reframe is, look at all of the possibility for transformation. Look at all the future economic value to the community. Look at, I will argue with and I've done it at book clubs for 11 months of why hiring a formerly incarcerated woman is the smartest thing you can do for your business. Like, I will advocate for that all day long, because I have found, and I truly believe this, it might sound naive, that people will always rise to the level that you believe in them. And especially people who have lost everything, been dehumanized, had their dignity stripped away, been incarcerated, they will always rise to that level.
Well, that's actually true of kids too. It's, I mean, sometimes I think sometimes our jobs are believing in people till they believe in themselves, but having it, and it has to be authentic, right? It has to be true. But if you believe in someone for things that they're actually going to be spectacular at, it's transformative. But this leads me to a question, because this kind of came up in your book. It was a very subtle point in your book, and I might have misunderstood it, because you talked right now about how implementing the forgiveness aspect of Archbishop Tutu's book into the Gemma piece of it, forgiveness. What are your thoughts? And I kind of got a little bit of an echo about the from your pre-engagement before you were incarcerated with some of the meetings types approaches to addressing addiction. And then another thing that people are interested in these days is this concept of rehabilitative justice. And I wonder what your thoughts are. I mean, so the forgiveness piece of it, amazing, right? That's to learn to forgive yourself, to move forward unencumbered with what happened before, unencumbered with your old nonsense, I think is the way Emerson put it, or Thoreau, I can't remember. My mom used to say that to us every night before we went to bed, right? So that was the equivalent, and it was a really nice thing to do. But so what were your thoughts about the other pieces of it, the meanings piece of it for addiction, and also, the rehabilitative justice component? And I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, my view of addiction and reason, part of my story is when I had a brief time out on bail before sentencing, I did relapse, and that's part of my story. And people in the world are very mad at me, and I put that in there on purpose because it's true. But I think, to me, addiction is a symptom of something else that I was looking for, and a trauma response. And so I think, when I got out on bail, I didn't have any tools. I had no skill. I had no substitutions for that. Like I am now 15 years later, hard things happen in life. And my go-to addiction's not even like in the, it's not even letter Z in the possible choices for me organically, just naturally. But I think, community is really what healed me. And, shame is a big part of my story. And I deeply was not who I am it wasn't that I've become someone else. I've become who I was, but in my time of addiction and the crimes I committed related to a mental health and medical health issue was not me. I knew right from wrong. And I believe like I committed crimes and I should, be held accountable for those things. But, until I carried so much shame, until I had community, until I could have authentic relationships with people where they knew my past, I was isolated and I was at risk. When you're isolated, you're at risk. And so, for me, you asked like, what was my moment? And really it was, when I lived in so much fear of people Googling me and people finding out my past. And when I just before the book owned my story and got up and said, here's who I was, here's someone I've been, and here's who else I am. And this is like, to be seen and to see myself as, that this was a season of my life. This is not my life. This is not my identity forever. This is a part of my story. That was, the feeling of lightness after just getting honest and being met and seen. And, that was felt better than any drug I ever took, any opiate I ever took, honestly. And it continues to be that way. And, the only reason to do my book was because I thought it could help. And we got to do the nonprofit because I knew we'd have a big microphone, and it came with it like a big responsibility. And for me, that stigma and shame was so deep and so long, kept me so present from amazing things in life. And so that is my,
I love it. I love it. The process, as it turns out, it's becoming who you actually are already through a process of letting go of things that are impeding your ability to be that person. And that comes in different forms. And part of that form is forgiveness. It's amazing. Cynthia, it looks like you were going to add something.
Well, I want to get some other voices in the room, and Judge Guy is here with us, and she's actually also in the book. But she had some great points in the chat. One direct message, but one that I think needs to be shared, and the other one to the whole group.
I've been looking at the chat like crazy.
Yeah. Judge Guy, do you want to unmute and share? I'm putting you on the spot.
Sure. So I shared a couple of things. So I think that pretrial conditions, because we've had bail reform and so many of us are in counties. I'm in Santa Cruz County, and so many of us are in counties where we got out in front of that immediately and just started figuring it out. And I think pretrial conditions have given us opportunities to individually and narrowly tailor services and supports, because I think that the idea that you're always applying the same orders to everybody, I mean, that doesn't work, and we have proof that doesn't work. So I think that pretrial release conditions are narrowly tailored, and although there may be certain recommendations through pretrial in a pretrial assessment report. But as a bench officer, I'm always looking like, well, what else? And so I'm asking the story like, okay, what do you do during the day? And who are you living with? Who relies on you? What are you involved in? When's the last time you worked? Well, do you volunteer anywhere? I'm always asking for more about the person, because I believe that part of the release should be a structure. And so we know that people thrive in structure and they don't isolate when they have a structure and when they are with their natural supports and or with in their situation where they're what we call pro-social activities. If they're engaged in pro-social activities, they're not alone, which is going to be healthy for them overall moving forward and being compliant with their condition release, as well as moving forward with healthy things. If it's as easy as, going and looking for work, or if it's going and volunteering, where do you feel like you're part of a community? What could you volunteer there? You like gardening. What about the Homeless Garden Project? What about going and volunteering to pick up the beaches if you love the outdoors? So there's a lot of things and ideas that the judges and the justice partners are aware of in the communities. And so just putting those ideas out as resources can then inform other people to come up with that plan. I think that the case plans to include those types of things are really important, so that if there is a stumble, for example, if they're using or they're not testing, or they're avoiding testing, or they're covering the testing device, well, that might not prompt an immediate revocation of their release. It might be an opportunity to say, okay, well, wait a minute, but they're doing these other things. They're going to their classes, or they're showing up in these other ways. Maybe they just need that reminder that how important it is to do their best and to keep those other things going. So a lot of times those other issues beyond traditional treatment or treatment opportunities can be a way for the bench officers to balance what they're doing as a whole. So that if there is some struggles in one area or some challenges, there are some positives as well. So that just like when we talk to our kids and our teens, that you can highlight positives and maybe end on a positive during that court intervention or court review. And it doesn't all have to be about maybe the fact that they haven't been testing with fidelity. So I think there's a lot of flexibility, and it's had us thinking of different ideas and looking at people differently and more holistically.
Well, thank you for sharing those observations. I mean, it's a wonder, it is, there are a lot of resources, especially on the county level. Oddly, it's a lot of federal money that goes into funding some of the programs that we're able to implement. And somewhat oddly, the federal government has different limitations. So we do say this sometimes, if someone has a state charge in addition to being on federal supervision, it gives us more opportunities to fashion conditions that can give people the structure they need to be they need to do well. It promotes safety, I think, as Cynthia said in the chat. And it's all safety, it's the person's safety and community safety. So it's a great observation, and it's a wonderful tool that we have. And there's so much good work being done on the county levels. So it's inspiring. So I don't know, it looks like Lara wanted to say something.
I just want to take this opportunity, since Judge Guy just spoke. Part of my story in the book, for those who haven't read it, is I had a ticking clock. My son was almost 4 when I was arrested. I had a year to reunify with him, and I was able, Judge Guy's talking about hearing the context of story, right? Like getting the context to a person, so they're not just that docket or that case file in the big stack. And I felt very grateful, and I felt very emotional today, because I had a judge who saw the context of that aspect of my case. It wasn't the criminal, it was the child dependency case. And regardless of what was happening with my ex-husband, co-defendant was able to give me custody of my son. I was able to beat that ticking clock. And I will say, the thing I've been most proud of in 15 years was almost a year ago when I drove my son into his dorm at UC San Diego, where he got in on a 4.0. And that was the first moment when I felt truly proud of myself, because I had this moment where I was like, wow, this could have turned out so differently for both of us. And statistically, he was more likely to go to prison than go into UC San Diego on a 4.0. And the reason that, part of the big reasons why I'm so emotional here and grateful, is because there was a judge who had the time and space and compassion to see the whole story of what was happening at that time when that decision was made, and to give me custody of my son. So I just want to say I'm very grateful.
So that's
Yeah, sorry.
it's a no, it's lovely. It's lovely. It's an amazing illustration of actually seeing people in the system makes all the difference in the world, and paying attention matters, and being seen matters. And of course, the meta issue of your son, but it's a big illustration of something that's actually very easy for us to do collectively, is to see each other as fellow humans. Yeah, Judge Guy.
Well, and that's really what procedural fairness is. And we are doing more and more teaching of new judges and new bench officers. I'm part of a whole team of people that do are part of new judge orientation, for example. And we are really working on throughout the bench. It's not just new judges. We have other educational tools that we're using to really have people think about procedural fairness. And procedural fairness is really seeing people and having them participate, and having people come to our courts and slowing the process down, explaining things, teaching from the bench as a way to have people actually be able to not be so overwhelmed, so completely frozen in that experience, and so nervous or so upset, so that we can work with them, work through their trauma triggers, work through invisible barriers to justice, all of those things to help them through the process. And that really is procedural fairness. And so I think that is part of our vernacular now in our bench. And I'm proud that we are moving to that point.
And so that's such a wonderful way of framing it, because process matters. And otherwise, in the way we were doing it, you know, probably in 2009 still, is mostly we're lecturing people or telling them the rules that they have to follow. It's not, that actually isn't process. So I think that, I mean, I think we're at time. I think that's about as beautiful a way of ending the conversation as anything I could imagine. I don't know what you think, Denise.
Well, I think I would love to talk to you, all of you, for a few more hours, but I will say, to have a Berkeley Judicial Institute program close with someone who's hung out with Oprah and Desmond Tutu crying about the impact the judge has had in her life is a very special moment. I'm so grateful to my colleague Justin for all his work on this program. So grateful to the three of you. I reached out blind to to Ms. Hardin, saying, I know when Oprah says your book is good, it doesn't matter that a reader says your book is good. And she said, I would love to do the program. So beyond grateful for what all of you are doing. That extends to the audience. I know that you're all here because you care about these issues, and I'm grateful. And in a very subtle point, if you haven't read the book, read the book. It's a gift to yourselves. That's what.
And it's a gripping read. And by the way, just so you know, Lara is she's a reader who became a writer, and so she's got the ear. You know, it's like music. You know, it's a lyrical thing. So it is not only a fascinating read; it's an enjoyable one because it's so beautifully said. Good prose makes me happy. I love to read and I love to write. Not in your sphere, it's like judicial writing, but it's beautifully done. And thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Denise, for having us.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.